When your own mother looks you in the eye and tells you that a place is above your class, it's more than just a casual insult. It's a scar that burns quietly beneath your skin. You try to laugh it off, pretend it doesn't matter, but deep down, something shifts. You start questioning your worth, your dreams, and the person you thought you could become. That's exactly what happened the day she said those words to me. We were standing outside the gleaming gates of a luxury resort, the kind where everything smells like money and exclusivity. My mother glanced at the marble driveway, the neatly lined palm trees, and then at me, her daughter, dressed in a plain shirt and scuffed shoes, and with a small, dismissive smile, she said, "Sweetheart, places like this are above your class." She didn't mean it to be cruel, but it landed like a verdict, a declaration that I would always belong on the outside looking in. I remember nodding quietly, pretending her words didn't sting. But they did. They stung so much that they rooted themselves deep inside me, growing into something powerful, a determination I didn't know I had. That night, while she talked about how some people are just born into certain lives, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, hearing those words replay over and over in my mind. Above your class. Above your class. What even was my class? Who decided that? Why did I have to accept it? That was the first night I realized that the pain of being underestimated could be turned into something useful, something transformative. When people underestimate you, they give you a strange kind of power. It's almost like they hand you a weapon, and it's up to you how you use it. I decided to use mine to prove her wrong, not out of hate, but out of the deep desire to rewrite the story she had written for me. I didn't come from money. I didn't have connections or an impressive education. What I did have was grit, curiosity, and the kind of stubbornness that refuses to die even when everything seems impossible. I started small, working part-time jobs, saving every penny, and reading everything I could about business, hospitality, and real estate. Each time someone told me that's not realistic, I smiled to myself because I had heard worse from my own mother. There were days I wanted to quit, when bills piled up, plans failed, and my dreams felt like a cruel joke. But then I'd remember that moment outside the resort gate, the way my mother looked at me with quiet certainty that I didn't belong there, and that memory would pull me back on track. I didn't want to prove her wrong just to spite her. I wanted to prove that no one, not even family, has the right to define where you belong. That belief became my driving force, pushing me through sleepless nights, failed deals, and every setback that tried to break me. Slowly, opportunities started to show up, not as luck, but as the result of every hour I had put in. I met mentors who believed in me, investors who saw my passion, and partners who shared my vision. Step by step, piece by piece, the impossible started taking shape. I remember the first time I saw the blueprint of what would become my own resort. It wasn't as grand as the one she once told me was above my class, but to me, it was everything. It was proof that I could create something from nothing, that I could build my own version of luxury, one that no one could tell me I didn't deserve. Owning that resort didn't happen overnight. It took years of learning, failing, rising, and pushing through fear. Every obstacle felt like another test of whether I truly believed in myself. But I kept going because the idea of giving up felt worse than any failure could. I didn't just want to step through those gates one day, I wanted to own them. I wanted to stand there and feel that I belonged, not because someone allowed me to, but because I had earned every inch of it. And when it finally happened, when the paperwork was signed and the keys were in my hand, I didn't feel the rush of revenge I expected. What I felt instead was quiet pride, a calm satisfaction that came from knowing I had built a life on my own terms. I walked through the resort's grand lobby, the marble floors gleaming just like they had that day years ago, and I thought of her words again. Above your class. I smiled softly to myself, realizing that sometimes the most powerful form of revenge isn't anger or confrontation. It's success. It's proving that your worth isn't something anyone can measure for you. It's reclaiming your story, one dream at a time, until even the people who doubted you can't help but see how wrong they were. The turning point didn't arrive with fanfare or lightning strikes. It came quietly, one ordinary morning, while I was pouring coffee in my tiny apartment, staring at a bank statement that looked more like a joke than a future. I remember the bitter taste of that moment, the heaviness of realizing that my life was stuck in the same cycle my mother had predicted for me. I was working long hours, saving little, and going nowhere fast. Her words still echoed in my head, taunting me with the same cruel rhythm, above your class. I had accepted them as truth for too long. But that morning, as the light from the window hit my reflection on the coffee pot, I saw something different in myself. I saw a woman who was tired of being told where she belonged. That was the moment I decided I would never let someone else's opinion dictate my limits again. The decision didn't come from anger, it came from exhaustion. Exhaustion from living small, from apologizing for wanting more, from constantly shrinking to fit inside other people's expectations. I realized that the only way to silence those voices was not by arguing, but by achieving. That realization felt like fire running through my veins. I knew I couldn't change my past or my background, but I could change my story. I promised myself that the next time my mother or anyone else said something was out of my reach, I would already be standing there, holding it in my hands. I didn't know how long it would take, but I knew that I would not stop until it was done. I started small. I took the same job that used to feel like a dead end and began treating it like a classroom. Every interaction, every customer, every mistake, I studied it all. I read books on hospitality, marketing, and management. I watched videos late at night about how businesses were built from scratch. While others were out spending their weekends, I was building a plan that no one knew existed. My coworkers laughed when I talked about someday owning a resort. You can't even afford a vacation, one of them joked. I smiled and said nothing, because I had already decided that my actions would speak louder than anything I could say. The turning point wasn't about a single event, it was about mindset. Once I stopped seeing myself as someone who needed permission to dream, everything changed. I stopped waiting for opportunities to come and started creating them. I took on extra shifts, saved every spare coin, and refused to let setbacks shake me. When I couldn't afford formal education, I built my own through trial and error. I started a small home business managing short-term rentals online. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I learned how to deal with guests, how to negotiate contracts, and how to market spaces to people who wanted comfort and experience more than brand names. Each step, no matter how small, became a brick in the foundation of what was coming. Of course, the journey was brutal. There were nights I wanted to give up, when failure felt like proof that my mother had been right. There were deals that fell apart, clients who disappeared, and days when I could barely afford groceries. But each disappointment carved something stronger inside me. I began to understand that success isn't about luck or privilege, it's about consistency. It's about doing the work even when no one's watching, even when everyone's laughing. I told myself over and over that the pain was temporary, but the pride of proving them wrong would last forever. And then, there came a day when the world finally started to shift in my favor. My first small rental business turned profitable. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make me believe I could go further. I reinvested every penny, expanded the business, and started looking for properties to manage under my own brand. I began attending real estate seminars, networking events, and industry meetups, rooms I once felt too unworthy to enter. But I went in anyway, pretending I belonged, until one day I didn't have to pretend anymore. People started to notice my confidence, my drive, my results. The same people who once ignored me began asking for my advice. That was when I realized something powerful. The world only respects what you build, not what you say you'll build. Every time I signed a new contract, every time I walked into a meeting, I carried that memory of my mother's words in the back of my mind. It no longer hurt, it fueled me. I understood now that her statement wasn't a prophecy, it was a challenge. The turning point wasn't about one big victory, but about the quiet decision to never let those words define me again. That morning in my small apartment had changed everything. It had given birth to a new version of me, one who didn't wait for permission, didn't beg for approval, and didn't crumble under judgment. That was the moment my story stopped being about her words and started being about my will. Building the dream in silence was the hardest and most beautiful part of my journey. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't loud, and no one clapped for me when I worked 16-hour days. There were no congratulations, no encouragement, just the quiet sound of determination echoing in empty rooms. I realized early on that dreams built in noise are often fragile, but dreams built in silence are made of steel. So I stayed quiet. I didn't post about my plans, didn't tell my friends, and certainly didn't share anything with my mother. People can't ruin what they don't know about, and I wanted my dream to grow safe from judgment, doubt, and unsolicited opinions. While everyone thought I was still that same small-town girl who didn't belong anywhere fancy, I was slowly building something extraordinary behind closed doors. I worked 3 jobs at one point. During the day, I managed customer complaints at a hotel. At night, I cleaned offices. On weekends, I ran a tiny online business renting out spare rooms in other people's homes. It was exhausting, but I treated every task as a lesson. Every time I saw how guests reacted to service, I took notes. I learned what made people feel valued, what made them come back, and what made them recommend a place to others. I studied hospitality not in a classroom, but in the real world, one tired shift at a time. I watched how managers led their teams, how they handled crises, and how they balanced comfort with efficiency. It wasn't just work, it was research. I was preparing for a life I hadn't yet told anyone I was creating. There were moments when silence felt lonely. Friends would go out, travel, celebrate small wins, while I sat at home crunching numbers or learning about property investment strategies. I missed parties, skipped family gatherings, and often went to bed too tired to dream. But every time I wanted to give up, I reminded myself of that day at the resort gate. I could still hear her saying, "This place is above your class," and it pushed me to keep going. I wanted the next time I walked through a resort like that to be different. I didn't want to just visit, I wanted to own it. That thought became my secret motivation, something sacred that no one else could touch. When I started saving money, it was barely enough to make a difference. But I learned the art of patience. Every paycheck, no matter how small, I divided into 3 parts, one for survival, one for learning, and one for the dream. Sometimes that meant skipping luxuries or delaying comfort, but I had learned to love the sacrifice. My silent work became a rhythm. I woke up before dawn to study, worked long hours, and ended my nights planning for something that didn't yet exist. People around me assumed I was living an ordinary life, struggling to make ends meet, but I knew the truth. I wasn't struggling. I was investing in myself, in my future, and in the quiet power of perseverance. The hardest part of building in silence is resisting the urge to prove yourself before it's time. I often wanted to tell people, especially my mother, that I was doing something big, that I wasn't the failure she believed I was. But I held back because I wanted my results to speak for me. There's a strength in being underestimated. It gives you space to move without pressure, to fail without scrutiny, and to rise without distraction. I allowed people to think I was nothing special because it made my progress invisible. While they were busy doubting me, I was laying the foundation of something permanent. There were days when silence felt like a burden. No applause, no validation, no reassurance that I was on the right path. I doubted myself more times than I can count. But then, there were also moments of deep satisfaction, the kind that comes when you realize you're getting closer, inch by inch. When I closed my first small property deal, I didn't celebrate publicly. I sat alone in my room, holding the keys, whispering to myself that this was only the beginning. I promised that one day I'd own something bigger, something that would rewrite every insult, every doubt, and every limitation I'd ever been handed. My silent journey taught me that not every victory needs an audience. Sometimes the best thing you can do for your dream is protect it from noise. I learned to find comfort in being unseen, to trust the process, and to fall in love with progress that no one else noticed. Each year, I grew more disciplined, more strategic, and more confident. The dream that once lived quietly in my mind was slowly becoming a reality I could touch. I didn't need approval anymore, I needed results. And when those results started to show, I realized that the world finally notices you only after you no longer need its validation. By the time people began asking, "How did you do it?" I had already done it. The foundation was laid, the deals were in motion, and the dream was no longer a secret. I had built it in silence, protected it in struggle, and nurtured it in solitude. What started as a whisper of defiance against my mother's words had grown into something unshakable. The quiet years had given me strength, clarity, and the confidence to stand tall. No one had seen it coming, and that was exactly the point. The power of revenge through success is unlike anything else. It doesn't come with shouting, anger, or confrontation. It comes with quiet confidence, the kind that makes people stop and wonder how you did it. When I finally started to see the results of my years of work, it didn't feel like vengeance at first. It felt like freedom. I had spent so long trying to prove my worth to others that I almost forgot what it felt like to live for myself. But when the first profits from my business began to roll in, when I walked into meetings as an equal instead of an outsider, I realized something deeper. Success wasn't just about money or power. It was about rewriting the story they wrote for me without my permission. The moment I understood that revenge could come through success was the moment I stopped needing validation. Every achievement, every milestone became proof that the limits people set for me were never real. When my mother told me that the resort was above my class, she wasn't just talking about wealth, she was talking about belonging. She believed that certain people were born into privilege while others were meant to serve it. I made it my mission to destroy that belief, not with arguments, but with results. Each time I accomplished something, I imagined all those dismissive glances, all those patronizing smiles, and I smiled back in silence, knowing they had fueled the fire that got me here. There is something beautiful about succeeding where you were once rejected. When I began developing my own property, I was terrified. It felt like stepping into a world that wasn't built for people like me. But that fear became my motivation. I studied every detail of the resort business, the architecture, the service models, the pricing strategies, even the psychology of luxury. I wanted to create not just a place people visited, but a place they remembered. The same kind of place my mother once said was out of my reach. The idea that I could own something like that, something that once symbolized everything I was told I could never have, became the sweetest form of justice I could imagine. When construction finally began, I visited the site every single day. I watched the walls go up, the tiles being laid, the lights being installed. Each nail, each piece of marble, felt like a victory over every doubt that had ever been thrown my way. I didn't tell my mother what I was building. I wanted her to find out the way everyone else did, through the headlines, through whispers, through the shock of realizing that the daughter she once called too ordinary had become extraordinary without her permission. That thought carried me through every challenge, every sleepless night, every setback. Revenge through success isn't about hurting anyone. It's about healing yourself so completely that you no longer need to prove anything. When the resort was finally finished, I stood in the middle of its grand lobby, surrounded by everything I had once dreamed of. Crystal lights, polished marble, the soft hum of music playing in the background. I ran my hand along the front desk, remembering the days I used to clean someone else's counter. I walked through the suites, remembering the nights I couldn't afford a decent place to sleep. And as I looked out over the ocean view, I thought about my mother's words again. Above your class. For a moment, those words echoed, but this time, they didn't sting. They sounded small, almost powerless. My success had turned them into background noise. People often think revenge means getting even, but that's not true. The most powerful revenge is to rise so high that the people who tried to hold you down can't even reach your level anymore. It's about turning pain into purpose, rejection into drive, and doubt into discipline. I didn't want to throw my success in anyone's face. I wanted to become the kind of person whose achievements spoke louder than any insult ever could. When the world looks at you differently because of what you've accomplished, it changes everything. People who once ignored you start paying attention. People who once doubted you start asking for your advice. And the ones who once looked down on you are forced to look up. My mother's reaction came later, long after the resort had opened and the reviews began flooding in. She found out through a magazine article that featured me as the owner. I wasn't there when she read it, but I heard from someone close to her that she went quiet for a long time after seeing my photo beside the headline. I didn't need to see her face to know what she was thinking. Maybe she felt pride, maybe regret, maybe confusion, but I knew one thing for sure. She finally realized that her words hadn't broken me. They had built me. Every cruel comment, every limitation, every reminder of what I supposedly couldn't do had become a brick in the foundation of my empire. That's the true power of revenge through success. It transforms the energy of pain into creation. It teaches you that the best response to doubt is excellence. Every time someone told me I couldn't, I turned it into a reason why I must. Every moment of humiliation became motivation. And when I finally stood at the top, it wasn't anger I felt, it was peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you didn't just survive their judgment, you thrived beyond it. Success had become my voice, my weapon, and my redemption. All at once, the unexpected reunion happened on a sunlit afternoon that felt almost too perfect to be real. I was walking through the resort, checking on the staff before a major event, when I noticed a familiar voice at the reception desk. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. It had been years since I last saw her, years since those words about class had been thrown like stones into my confidence. But when I turned toward the lobby, I saw her, my mother, standing there with a small travel bag, her expression caught between awe and disbelief. She hadn't recognized me yet. She was looking around, admiring the lobby, the marble floors, the scent of jasmine in the air, completely unaware that every inch of this place had been built by the same daughter she once said didn't belong in places like this. I didn't rush to greet her. I stood for a moment, hidden behind a column, watching her as she took it all in. She looked impressed, maybe even a little intimidated. I could see the way her hands brushed her clothes, as if trying to appear more polished, more fitting for a place like this. I knew that gesture too well. It was the same one I used to do when I felt like I wasn't enough. The irony was almost poetic. Here she was, standing in the resort she once claimed was beyond my reach, now paying to stay in a room with my name on the deed. That quiet realization filled me with an emotion I couldn't fully name, something between pride, vindication, and an aching sadness. I walked toward her slowly, the click of my heels echoing across the floor. When she finally turned and saw me, her face froze. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could see the confusion flicker in her eyes, then recognition, and then something deeper, something like disbelief. "You work here?" she asked, her voice cautious, as if afraid of the answer. I smiled, not the timid smile she remembered, but one of calm confidence. "No," I said softly, "I own this place." The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. She blinked, as if trying to make sense of what I had just said. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She looked around again, at the elegant chandeliers, the uniformed staff greeting guests, the soft music filling the air, and then back at me. I watched her eyes fill with the weight of realization. She tried to recover, straightening her posture, pretending not to be shocked. "You own it," she repeated, almost whispering. I nodded, watching her carefully. There was a part of me that wanted to gloat, to remind her of her words that day at the gates, but I didn't. The revenge I had once imagined didn't look like this. It wasn't fire or fury, it was grace. Standing there, I realized I didn't need to throw her words back at her. The fact that she was standing on my marble floor inside my dream was enough. Her silence said more than any apology could. She didn't need to say she was wrong. I could see it in her eyes, in the way she couldn't look at me for too long, in the way her pride crumbled quietly. I offered to show her around the resort. She agreed, her tone uncertain but soft. As we walked through the hallways, she admired the decor, the view, the architecture, and I could feel her trying to process everything. "You've done well," she said finally, her voice trembling just a little. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was close enough. I nodded, letting her words hang in the air. I told her about the design choices, the inspiration behind the place, the hard work that went into every corner. She listened, and for once, she didn't interrupt or correct me. For the first time in my life, my mother looked at me not as her daughter who needed guidance, but as a woman who had built something on her own. There was a shift between us, an invisible line of respect forming where once there had only been doubt. Later that evening, she joined me for dinner at the restaurant inside the resort. The same restaurant where guests waited weeks for a reservation. The irony was almost too much to bear. I watched her taste the food, glance around at the ambience, and then at me. "It's beautiful," she said softly. I smiled and thanked her, even though the compliment wasn't really for me. It was for the place she never thought I could be part of. I didn't tell her about the nights I cried from exhaustion, or the times I almost lost everything. She didn't need to know the details. All she needed to see was that the daughter she once underestimated had become everything she said she couldn't. When she left the next morning, she hugged me. It wasn't a long hug, but it was the kind that carried years of unspoken words. For a brief moment, I felt the ache of the past fade a little. She didn't say sorry, and I didn't ask for it. Sometimes life gives you a moment so poetic, so perfectly aligned, that you realize you don't need closure in words, you find it in what you've built. As she walked out the door, I watched her disappear into the sunlight, her silhouette framed against the same resort that had once been her measure of what I couldn't achieve. Only now it was mine. The revenge was complete, not through confrontation, but through the undeniable proof that I had become exactly who she never believed I could be. Redefining worth was the final step in my journey. The quiet realization that my value was never something to be given or taken by anyone else. For so long, I had lived through the lens of how others saw me, especially my mother. Her words had shaped the way I measured myself, the way I viewed success, the way I chased approval that never truly mattered. But standing at the top of my own mountain, looking at everything I had built, I began to understand that worth is not about wealth, class, or status. It's about resilience, courage, and self-belief. Owning the resort wasn't just about proving a point. It was about reclaiming the narrative of who I was and what I was capable of becoming. In the years that followed, I watched countless people walk through the doors of my resort, each of them carrying their own insecurities, their own silent battles. Some came to escape their pain, others to celebrate their triumphs. I realized that everyone, no matter how polished they appear, struggles with the same question: am I enough? It struck me that the world is full of people waiting for someone else to tell them they matter, waiting for validation that should have been theirs all along. I used to be one of them. I used to think that my worth depended on how others saw me, that success only meant something if it impressed the people who doubted me. But success without self-respect is hollow, and revenge without peace is just another form of pain. The more I grew, the more I understood that real worth comes from persistence. It's in the quiet moments when no one is watching and you still choose to show up. It's in the times you fail, yet try again. Worth isn't determined by the background you come from, the money you have, or the approval you receive. It's defined by your capacity to keep believing in yourself when the world tells you not to. My mother's words had once made me feel small, but now I saw them for what they truly were: limitations she had accepted for herself and unknowingly tried to pass down to me. I realized I had broken a cycle, not just for me, but for anyone who would come after me. I had proven that our worth is not inherited, it's earned through persistence and faith in our own potential. As I continued running the resort, I began mentoring young women who reminded me of myself years ago, full of dreams, but burdened by doubt. They came from humble beginnings, with stories of being told they weren't good enough, smart enough, or rich enough to chase something big. I saw their fire, their frustration, and their hunger for more. I taught them what I had learned the hard way, that no one can define your worth unless you let them. That the world will always have something to say, but your job is to build something so strong that their words can't touch you. Watching them grow, take risks, and find their confidence became more fulfilling than any profit or recognition. There were days I still thought about my mother, not with bitterness, but with a strange sense of gratitude. She had been wrong about me, but in being wrong, she had given me the greatest motivation I could have asked for. If she had believed in me easily, maybe I would have never fought this hard. Maybe I would have settled for ordinary. Sometimes the harshest words create the strongest hearts. I no longer needed her approval. I understood now that the real victory was not in proving her wrong, but in finding peace with who I had become. I didn't want her apology anymore because I didn't need it. I had already written my own version of success, one built on discipline, integrity, and grace. There's a quiet power in knowing your worth after years of being told you had none. It changes the way you walk, the way you speak, the way you look at yourself in the mirror. I started treating myself differently, not as someone lucky to have succeeded, but as someone who had earned every bit of it. I stopped hiding my past, stopped being embarrassed by where I came from. My story, once a source of pain, had become my greatest strength. Every scar, every setback, every cruel remark, they all played a role in building the woman I had become. And that woman no longer sought validation from anyone. As I looked around the resort one evening, the sunset spilling gold across the horizon, I realized that true revenge isn't about proving someone wrong, it's about proving yourself right. It's about standing in your own light and understanding that you are always worthy, even before anyone saw it. My mother's words had once defined me, but now they were just echoes of a life I had outgrown. The same place that once symbolized my inferiority had become a reflection of my strength. I had not only changed my circumstances, I had changed my definition of worth. And in doing so, I had discovered something that no amount of money or recognition could ever buy: the unshakable peace that comes from knowing who you are and never needing anyone to remind you again.